In Game of Thrones, Tyrion Lannister said something to the effect of, when you cut out a man's tongue, you are only showing that you're afraid of what he might say. You're not proving him a liar. I probably totally screwed that up, but who cares? The point is that sunlight really is the best possible disinfectant. And this is very true. Put things out in the sun. If you put a flower out in the sun, it will grow, it will prosper, it will become something beautiful, more beautiful. If you put something rotten out in the sun, it will dry out and it will kill the rot. So it's important to do this with ideas and ideologies. And I'll go back to, so I was on the Average Intelligence podcast last night. Go check that out. Average Intelligence Productions on YouTube. I'll try to remember to put a link here later. So last night I was on there and we were talking about what's going on in Cuba, and we were talking about communism. And some of this was, well, how did communism take over? How does communism take over the minds of so many people when we can see historically that it's terrible? It destroys things. That's always the end result. Well, capitalism gets a bad name, yet it's responsible for doing great things. So that aside, let's just talk about the sunlight being the best disinfectant, and putting things in the sun, bringing light to them, shining light on them in order to disinfect them. So back, I forget the time period, when McCarthyism was going on. So McCarthy was calling everyone out as a communist. And so some validity to that. The problem was that McCarthy made communism basically a crime. And the reason this becomes a problem is because then what do communists do? Instead of having conversations and open dialogue with people who might change their mind or people whose minds they might change, they were hidden. They were pushed into the dark. Well, the dark is where things rot, where things mold, and where that rot and that mold, that they grow the best. And so by making communism a sin, so to speak, it got pushed into a place where it could fester, and it could become an even bigger monster than it was before. Whereas if sunlight had been shined on it, and there had been these actual open conversations, instead of forcing the communists into hiding themselves and their ideas, then we could have gotten rid of that ideology much easier. And if you want something comparable now, the White House loves saying that white supremacy is like the biggest threat to our nation. That's ridiculous. There's so few people out there that honestly associate with that. Usually it's people calling somebody that just so that they can say, oh, look, I found one. Kind of like they did with McCarthyism. Call someone a communist so that you can say, oh, look, I found a communist and I weeded one out. Trust me, you probably haven't met a real white supremacist. Being a bald guy with tattoos, people who are of that ilk are a little more likely to open up to me in such ways. And so I could tell you a little bit more about who they are and what they are. But the point is that is also not a good ideology. That is another type of rot. And right now, it's actually very small, just like in McCarthy's time with communism. Communism was very small, and it didn't become big until it got pushed into the dark, and it was allowed to fester and grow and rot in the dark, because that's the only place it can grow. It's the only place a bad ideology can grow. And that's the same thing, if we're not careful, that we're going to do with ideologies like white supremacy and stuff like that. If you're out there calling somebody a white supremacist, and they think, well, Okay, but I'm not. I'm a good person. Well, then they may start to associate what they are as a good person with this idea of white supremacy, and they say, maybe I should go look into that. Maybe if people think that this is who I'm like, maybe I should go look into that. And then they go into that darkness, and they end up getting infected with that rot, just like the communists. And that's exactly what we don't want. So the reason I bring this up about the podcast last night is both of us had points that we wanted to make in our discussion that we couldn't make. That we were, according to the rules of our new public square, which is things like Facebook, YouTube, Twitter, all of that. That is where our public conversations happen. And so when those are censored, for whatever reason, it diminishes that sunlight going to things. And it increases that darkness, that shadow, where all these horrible things can grow and fester. And that's what we don't want. And so what we have today is people cheering for exactly the thing that's going to destroy them, which is a reduction of their rights, a reduction of their openness, and a reduction of those conversations that shine sunlight, either on the wonderful things that will grow into a flower or the horrible things that will grow if they are left and kept in the dark. Let me know what you guys think in the comments. Have a great day and say hi to Max.